Welcome and thank you to all in person here in the auditorium and all of you online for joining us for this parallel session. On behalf of the University of Bergen, I would like to thank the Danish Presidency of the Council of the EU and the EU Science Research and Innovation for this opportunity to raise awareness for the ocean as part of the global common heritage of humankind. As you can see, we have called the session Transcending Borders, Ocean Science Diplomacy as an Agent of Change, and we'll discuss science diplomacy to benefit the greatest of all the global commons, our one ocean. You may wonder why we have put a question mark at the end of the session title, and we actually didn't, but that question mark somehow, and rather mysteriously, got attached to the title during correspondence leading up to the conference, and suddenly it stuck. And it was as if that question mark was a natural extension of our sense of wonder and trying to create ambivalence and some mystique and to signal the openness and the border-defying nature of the three topics we will address, which are 1, global equity, 2, nature, incorporating the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and finally, security and sovereignty. And that connection between security and sovereignty is vital, and we'll get back to that. And we have first to announce, sadly, that Haidee Barrenger, Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian Embassy here in Copenhagen, has been forced to cancel her appearance on this panel due to the recent terrorist attack in Sydney, which has meant that all Australian diplomatic staff have been called to deal with the aftermath of this heinous act. I'd like to start with a question before I go to the next step of introducing the panel we have gathered here. We are at a conference for science diplomacy, and this is a session on the ocean. So it would be interesting to see how many of you, if you can raise your hands, those who feel it, that you are more ocean people than actually science diplomacy people. Who is more an ocean person amongst you? Yeah, I see a couple of familiar faces there, actually, among the ocean people. Okay, well, that's good for us to know for our further discussions. And then I maybe should have a tiny warning that the ocean people love acronyms, and we have our own acronyms. So I already apologize. Please forgive us. We will use acronyms. We'll try to explain them as we go along. We are delighted to have you on board for this voyage, and I'll start with introducing Alice Vadrot, right next to me here. She is a professor for international relations and the environment based at the University of Vienna in Austria. She is also part of the mission board for the EU's Restore Our Oceans and Waters. She received an ERC starting grant for the project Maripol Data, which mapped the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, or BB&J agreement. So BB&J is a key acronym. Last year, she received an ERC Consolidator grant for a new project dealing with digital ocean twins and their relevance in international negotiations, twin politics. And finally, as part of the EU project Marco Polo, she is investigating the need for data in biodiversity policy and nature conservation practice. Good to have you with us, Alice. Next to her is Andrei, who is the Director for Science and Innovation at the relatively new Brazilian National Institute of Ocean Research, or INPO. He has worked on the ocean science policy diplomacy nexus for more than 20 years. He received his PhD at the World Maritime University in Malmö, not too far away from here. And fittingly for this session, his PhD thesis was on ocean science diplomacy. João Bettencourt, in the middle, works as a research fellow in the Water, Coast and Ocean team at the Stockholm Environment Institute. A physical oceanographer by training, he hails from Portugal, and before arriving in Sweden was a postdoctoral fellow in the innovative program Shaping European Research Leaders for Sustainability, or SEAS, which is in part funded via the EU's Horizon 2020 program. And SEAS has also been endorsed as an official UN Ocean Decade Action. Angelique is a lawyer from the Seychelles, specializing in the law of the sea. Her day job is as lead ocean negotiator for the Alliance of Small Island States, or AOSIS. This works include negotiations on the before-mentioned BB&J agreement that also Alice has studied a lot, and plastic pollution, amongst others, of what Angelique has been working on. She previously served as the Chief of Staff to the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Climate Action and Just Transitions. She has served 2 periods on the advisory board for the UN Ocean Decade, and most recently, she graduated as a PhD from the Islands and Small States Institute at the University of Malta. Congratulations to you on that, Angelique. Kieran Coleman is a policy officer at the European Commission in the Ocean Unit at DG Research and Innovation. He has been in the Commission for more than 5 years and joined the research and innovation area about 1 year ago, working on the mission Restore Our Oceans and Waters. For the past 6 months, he is mainly working on the All-Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance, AORIA, and as part of the European Ocean Pact, which was launched at the 3rd UN Ocean Conference in June in Nice, he is working on the Ocean Observation Initiative. Thank you all for being here, which leads me to my co-moderator at the very end there, Edvard Hviding, Professor of Social Anthropology at the University of Bergen, Norway. He has worked in the Pacific Islands for almost 40 years. His approach to ocean science diplomacy is largely that of a practitioner, not the least during the BB&J negotiations, where he worked on the traditional knowledge aspect for the Pacific Island state of Palau. And I may also add that Edvard got a major grant for the European Consortium for Pacific Studies to the EU's FP7 program, and the outcomes from this helped shape the EU's Pacific policies. And finally, I'm Sverre Drønen. I have a background from the media before transitioning to a job at the University of Bergen. After being part of the university's delegation to the inaugural UN Ocean Conference in June 2017, I became the university's contact point with the UN system, in particular our work on Sustainable Development Goal 14, SDG 14, Life Below Water. So there is a broad ocean-oriented mix here on this panel, and one quick thing, we will try and accommodate a Q&A at the end. We're a little squeezed for time because of the delays, but we want to also hear your voices. Both in person and online audience can also ask questions. And if you want to address it at someone particular in the panel, then indicate that when you ask the question later on. And then, Edvard, you'll take us over to the next section here as we dip further into ocean science diplomacy on the what, why, and how of ocean science diplomacy.
Thank you, Sverre, for this almost breathtaking introduction. It's quite a tall order to introduce a panel of this scope and size. But I think we can start by saying that, one, we are not exactly in agreement about what ocean science diplomacy is or may be. We are not in the panel, nor are you in the audience, but we know if we don't know the what, at least we don't know how to agree on it. We know the why. We know the reason why it is so important to get good, solid connections and interactions and exchanges between scientists and diplomats for the cause of the world's only ocean. We also, then we know the why, we also perhaps can speak about the how. The how would simply be about generating a repertoire of channels for promoting and facilitating the kinds of exchanges that we believe are central to connecting the science of the ocean and the diplomacy of the ocean, because there's only one ocean, right? Even though the S turns up every now and then. I think my own experience from this, as Sverre alluded to, and I'll be quick there, is that of a very kind of everyday practitioner. I'm thinking of perhaps the beehive, which is the floor of the United Nations, where all the states are. And where words are traded, words are filtered, and ultimately there are attempts at getting what is called by delegates for the states at the UN language, that which is presented in statements. Aspects of the language should get into text, which then becomes the kind of draft treaties that everyone is working on. But I'm thinking about this and my memories, in a sense, from these long-drawn negotiations about biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction becomes then a particularly specific light on what science diplomacy may be, the interaction, the constant exchanges, the constant discussions between, roughly speaking, diplomats and their advisors, some of which are scientists. And in a certain way then, we can start from the very elementary level of people speaking to each other, and maybe gain, as we scale up our discussion today, some formations about what ocean science diplomacy is, what it should be, and how it should work. So with that, I think I'll let my co-moderator just continue, and we shall be moving on to another exposition about ocean science diplomacy.
Yes, and seeing that so few of you really are ocean people, maybe we do need to have an expert on ocean science diplomacy who has published several papers on this. Go into the background and history of it. Andrei, please, the word is yours.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm Andrei, I'm also from Brazil, and I have studied this thing and practiced this thing for many, many years. One of the most important things, since this audience is not of oceaners, which is great, is that you have to understand that the ocean is just a big water mass in the planet, and it's constantly moving. So science has showed us that a drop of water that comes out of Antarctica takes around a century to reach here, the North Atlantic. But it's always moving. And we also know that the movements follow the moon, so we have the tides. So the ocean is one, and this ocean is alive, and it's very much influencing life as we know it. The only reason why we have life in the planet is actually because of the ocean. But the ocean is also one of the global commons that has very specific and fragmented rules about it. So at the UN level, there is a convention on the law of the sea that decided that countries would have spaces in that ocean. And those spaces only took 20, 30 years to be negotiated. And those spaces have sovereignty rights, but also exclusive exploration rights, and those are different. And aside from that, you have a lot of international waters, which is almost 90% of this big water blob that exists in the planet. And that water bubble, that international water, is not exactly very well regulated. It will be now by January 16th, when we finally have a new agreement into force. But that water, until today, belongs to nobody. But the seabed below that water belongs to everybody. And there's a big difference in that. Now, for you to know where your coastline ends and your water starts, and what you can do and can't do about your water, you need to know. So you need to research. So science is the basis of almost all settlements that we have into the ocean regime. Therefore, the ocean becomes a very strong and powerful player when we discuss ocean science diplomacy. Because now you're not just talking about the ocean that connects us all and that requires a lot of international cooperation for science. That's okay, and that's always going to be there. But now you're speaking about, if I am able to understand the deep sea, then I am able to classify if I can mine or not. And that becomes a power into diplomatic negotiations. And that is part of ocean science diplomacy. On the other hand, since 1982, when the Convention on the Law of the Sea was adopted, we have very good provisions in there, because we figure out as a collective humanity that we needed to understand this ocean as a whole. So we have there yet provisions that try to balance the capacities of the world, of the countries around the world, to study the ocean in front of them so we can understand as a whole that ocean. That is also part of ocean science diplomacy. However, those provisions are the least implemented in the convention. So therefore, we have a higher concentration of research capacities in the global north, but we have a higher vulnerability of the coastal communities in the global south. And we are very much unable to understand vast areas of that majestic water blob that exists in the planet. So ocean science diplomacy in this case is not just the provision of scientific advice for better diplomatic decisions. It's also diplomacy helping those countries by fostering funds and new research and collaboration. So those countries in the global south are equally prepared for what's to come. And the last thing about ocean science diplomacy, which is key to understand, is that diplomacy is pushing science to provide answers in a pace that is not scientific. So scientists are being pushed in the ocean to provide answers about the climate, biodiversity loss, pollution, plastics in our systems, without having the proper funding or the proper time to study that completely. So that also becomes a pressure on the ocean science diplomacy. So taking this all combined, we should look at ocean science diplomacy as a big opportunity for us to secure and protect what provides us life, food, commercial ties, navigation, and even the internet because of the cables that go underwater. So think it through. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrei, for taking us sort of from this European stage that we're on onto the global stage, because as Edvard stressed here, we have one ocean. It's all one ocean and everything is connected there. And I think what you just said, Andrei, really underlined that. And to take us further into this, we'll then get more into the practitioner view of this and maybe have a look at the supply and demand side of ocean science diplomacy. Edvard.
Yeah, I think perhaps we could start by posing a short question to our EU representative, which is not a difficult question at all, I think, Kieran. It's really about what are your expectations, and we can speak to you personally here. You're in here not as a representative of anything larger than yourself necessarily, but I think what are your expectations of what ocean science diplomacy can actually achieve?
Thank you. So at DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission, we're certainly working very hard, first on ocean policy, and then particularly in this year even, science diplomacy and ocean science diplomacy. So I guess my expectations, based on a lot of the announcements that my colleagues in hierarchy have made this year, are very high of the very positive impact it can have. So just to very briefly, in terms of ocean policy this year, the big event at the United Nations Ocean Conference from a European Commission perspective was the announcements of the EU Ocean Pact. That was announced by President von der Leyen, and we, in the European Commission, which is a very hierarchical organization, when the person at the very top announces something, it's deemed as very important, and it will generate a lot of work for me and my colleagues who are working on this type of thing. But that's very welcome. So it was a very big year for ocean policy from our perspective. But then for ocean, how that fed in or is feeding into ocean science diplomacy, I was going to briefly talk about mention just 3 actions this year. So one is in the All-Atlantic Ocean space. So there's the All-Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance. So that is an alliance between the EU and 12 partners around the Atlantic: Canada, the US, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Senegal, Ghana, Cabo Verde, Morocco, the UK, Norway, and Iceland. So it's an alliance, and this year we were particularly busy from a European perspective because we were chairing it this year. Last year Canada was the chair, and next year we're passing it to Brazil. So that's a very active science cooperation alliance, and we certainly always refer to it as a ocean science diplomacy alliance although I know there's a debate about how you do define that. And then I'll probably talk about the All-Atlantic Alliance a bit more throughout this panel, so I'll just very briefly mention two other things that I expect will have an impact. One relates to the Black Sea, and one is the Mediterranean. So the European Commission earlier this year in May launched its Black Sea strategy. Now the Black Sea has many issues that don't all relate to the sea itself, or marine issues, so security, energy, etc. But one key pillar of that specifically referred to environmental preparedness and specifically coastal communities. And in that strategy for the Black Sea, we specifically refer to science diplomacy. So I see science diplomacy coming more and more into our official documents. And this strategy that was launched this year is just one in a very long line of things. So my colleague Signe Razzo in the key session earlier referred to step by step. She was asked, why is it taking so long for the EU to have a framework for science diplomacy? And in the Black Sea, for example, back in 2007, we did Black Sea Synergy. Then that led on to a strategic research and innovation agenda. That led on to several projects that we funded through Horizon Europe. So it's kind of a step by step, and I think that's my understanding is how a lot of diplomacy also ends up working. And then just finally, the Pact for the Mediterranean. It was, the details were all set out in October this year. And it's, again, it's not only related to marine issues, but it does touch on that, of course. It refers to specifically that we will establish a Mediterranean Science Diplomacy Centre. It's not the first time that has been brought up. Again, it's building on other initiatives. And again, this Pact for the Mediterranean specifically has a reference to ocean diplomacy. In that context, it refers to working together with the European countries in the Mediterranean, but also the non-European countries, working together to implement the BBNJ, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions agreement. So the Mediterranean Pact, the Black Sea strategy are more than just ocean, but ocean is a key part of it, and science diplomacy is all tied up. So I think I kind of expect a lot from those, and I think we'll be quite busy at the European Commission.
Thank you so much for that, Kieran. We have gained a lot from the overview of these things, and we also understand how the implementation of global treaties then connect into regional challenges and how all that works. I have a quick one to follow up with before maybe turning it back to Sverre again, which is, and forgive me for being sounding simplistic, it's about supply and demand. Sounds like a kind of a basic course in economics or something, but it's not. It's about who decides what knowledge is needed. And I'm looking at you here, Angelique, because you represent the Association of Small Island States, about 39 countries. That really is a big bloc in the UN, and that also has responsibility for really an enormous amount of ocean. But I'm thinking, if we want to have some encouragement and some development of connectivities between scientists and diplomats, you are probably our best card here to comment a little bit about who decides. Andrei was interestingly pointing out that maybe diplomacy can push science to be kind of a bit more to shortcut science a little bit. But I think we can be optimistic in this sense and say that, well, perhaps it's about who we need really to discuss who decides what knowledge is needed, when and for what.
Thanks everyone for joining our session, and thanks for the question. So I'm from the Seychelles, small island developing state in the Indian Ocean, and I work for Palau, which is an even smaller island developing state, as the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. And to your question around who decides, I think Andrei already hinted at who decides in his exposition around ocean science diplomacy. And I guess the short answer is whoever funds the research decides, right? And I know it's a skeptical answer, but I mean, ultimately, it is those with the resources and power to make such decisions are deciding what kind of research and knowledge is generated. And here, in addition to resources, there's also those with the privilege to engage in knowledge production and generation, right? Because not everyone in the world has the privilege to spend many years engaging in science, whether the opportunity is available, is made available to them or not, and so on. So I think it's both resource and privilege helps with this whole who decides what knowledge and what technology and so on is produced. But then I want to, perhaps I'll narrow in onto our topic about ocean science diplomacy. And here I suspect, the question becomes, is it the scientist or is it the diplomat who gets to decide what knowledge is needed? And I think this sounds a bit egocentric in many ways that I say the diplomat should decide. But I think I won't make it so simplistic. I think one of the things that's a signal for us all is that the world committed to the UN decade for ocean science, the UN decade for on ocean science for sustainable development, and that was a global indication, a global direction that we needed more than just science for science itself, but science to solve problems, to support sustainable development. And that, to my mind, requires not choosing one or the other, but in fact providing sufficient space for policymakers, for governments, for diplomats to be able to say what science is needed to support the work that they do. But now I'll come full circle. The reality of the situation is a diplomat from a small island developing state may know what knowledge they would like. Do they have the resources to get that knowledge generated is a different question. So to my mind, if I were to pick a side, if I had to, I would like diplomats to have more of a say of what science and knowledge is generated, but at the same time, it has to be diplomats from the global north and the global south doing that. Right now, as it stands, to your question, who decides? It's governments from the global north. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that set of observations, Angelique. I think we have a lot of food for thought here, and you touched directly on the questions of equity that will also be part of our continuing discussion. I'm wondering, Sverre, where should we introduce this specific topic of ours, the equity question?
Yes, that's sort of one of the main topics that we have sort of highlighted for this event, and there are many aspects to that. Obviously, blue economy is a rising topic that becomes more and more important in international discussions. But deriving from that again, it's the development of technology and knowledge sharing, and that goes directly into the issues already raised here by Angelique and Andrei. And I think it would be interesting if we also look at it. Because like the ball should then also a little bit kick back to us in the so-called global north, because at the end of the day we have the resources, and what do we actually do with them? Are they equitably shared? And we of course know the answer to that, but what can be done about it, and how can science diplomacy contribute to addressing that? Edvard.
Yeah, well, we can reach a point here, I think, in our discussion where we would really have to ask very hard questions about how much scientists should bring on the table in order for diplomats to have the minimum knowledge required to take action. This is pretty tricky because we know that scientists really want to study in the long run and generate lots of data and analyze the data over and over again to be sure. So we go back to your proposition, Andrei, that diplomacy can push science into I think what you indicated could be shortcuts. But really, we could lift it up to a more general level and ask, where is science diplomacy for the ocean most needed in order to address issues that relate specifically to the sharing of knowledge and benefits? And I think I'm going to ask you, Alice, to comment a bit on that.
Yeah, thank you very much also for having me on this panel as a political scientist that has studied the negotiations around the so-called BBNJ agreement with a team over the last years. I think the multilateral negotiations are an important site where science diplomacy happens in the day-to-day activities of both diplomats and scientists. And in our research, what was really interesting is we tried somehow to nail it down, identify the science, identify the diplomacy, and it's not that easy. So as Angelique, as you pointed out, you have scientific advisors on national delegations. You have scientific institutions such as DOSI, the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, participating in the negotiations, making statements, going into both directions, in the need to have more science to contribute to the designation and monitoring of marine protected areas on the high seas, but also to support science itself. So science is not just an actor here of something you need to implement the BBNJ agreement. Science is also affected. So you also have scientists that try to shape the future of scientific cooperation, of scientific knowledge production, also pointing to the need to broaden what is science, so to include knowledge from local communities and indigenous peoples. So I think the BBNJ case really illustrated that it was not just about how to conserve and sustainably use marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, so 70% of the ocean, broadly speaking. It was also about regulating how we will do science in the high seas, who will contribute, what it means, also in terms of the epistemologies, the concepts, the cooperation, but also the institutions. So part of the BBNJ discussion was also, how can we set up a scientific and technical body that is fit for purpose, that can allow us to bring scientists and experts and other knowledge holders on the table to be able to really draw the lines in the ocean where a protected area should be established, or to identify areas where area-based management tools could work, to contribute to environmental impact assessments. So those different elements of the BBNJ treaty are very concrete, and they demand very concrete scientific expertise and data, and also contributions from other knowledge holders to ensure that it's not just implemented in a robust way, but also to make sure that we talk about equity issues. So what are the effects of establishing a protected area in this part of the ocean or in that part of the ocean? Who is affected and why? And I think this brings me to the concept of ecological connectivity, and I bring it up here because it not just illustrates the need to think the ocean as a broad, interconnected big water mass, as you mentioned, right, connected through things like migratory species, but it also was an issue in the BBNJ negotiations. So when you look at the first text, ecological connectivity was not there. And then all of a sudden, many negotiators used this concept, arguing we need ecological connectivity in the BBNJ treaty. And we analyzed it together with my former doctoral student, Ina Tesno von Wysocki, were mostly researchers from the Global South, small island developing states, that advocated the concept. They used the concept produced by scientists in the Global North to advocate for a more connected thinking, also arguing this is how we, local indigenous communities, think about the ocean. It's our cosmology. We believe that everything is interconnected, which is why everybody, also landlocked countries, for those that wonder why an Austrian is talking about the ocean, we should care about the ocean and specifically the high seas. And I see a lot of potential in the BBNJ treaty to develop new innovative practices on how to really live science diplomacy in a multilateral context.
Thank you. I wonder, Andrei, would you like to add a few words on the concept of benefit sharing? Because that is kind of a catchword that comes up in so many different situations. And again, benefit sharing might sound like a foreign word, but it's not an acronym at least.
Yeah, so benefit sharing was something that was developed in other conventions, but then also Brazil included it in its own legislation, and that became a good example, because then whatever you take out of the natural resources need to be shared with all the stakeholders. So we have that in our own legislation for biodiversity, and that was taken upon for the High Seas Treaty or the BBNJ, because even landlocked countries or communities which are unable to access the high seas, and we are speaking about, so you have an idea, $40,000 a day for ship time. So not everybody is actually able to have ships to go to the high seas, collect things, and then make progress in terms of biotechnology or new materials or even new medication. So that research will be constrained to only a few actors in the world, most of which link to the biomedical industry. So there was this concern that we should share the benefit, and the benefit could be on a monetary or non-monetary basis. But again, one of these provisions that we are yet to see how it's going to be implemented, because together with that provision, there's another one, again, on capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. We have been trying to implement that for the past 40, 50 years. It's not there. So if we are able to push these boundaries again, and BBNJ was another try to do that, and now the BBNJ has encompassed, it will have COPs, such as the climate, because that worked. It will have a clearinghouse mechanism, making believe that we will be able to push for new collaboration that actually benefits the people in the ground. So let's see how this will be implemented, because neither the clearinghouse mechanism of the climate convention, neither the transfer of marine technology under the Convention on the Law of the Sea have worked. So let's see if now this is a new hope for us to actually get the science we need for the diplomacy we also need for the future we want.
Thank you so much, Andrei. My co-moderator, should we say something about the blue economy, I wonder?
Yes, we can maybe switch over to that, no? Or should we? Or maybe we actually should go to the indigenous knowledge, because I think that builds more naturally on this.
Yeah, maybe that could be something of interest.
Yeah.
You know, this is close to my heart as well. You know, it's about how can traditional knowledge, and I say traditional knowledge because it's kind of sometimes usually called traditional knowledge at the UN. It's and the whole debate about whether it's indigenous knowledge or traditional, it's a tricky one. But we say indigenous and traditional knowledge, scientific knowledge, and other forms of knowledge. How can these different forms of knowledge be put on an equal footing, so that maybe it can strengthen ocean and science diplomacy globally? Angelique, it's kind of natural to ask you that question, and I'm going to also maybe follow it up with someone else here, but the whole knowledge thing, putting knowledges in the plural on an equal footing, can we do that?
Ooh, we have the opportunity to try. I think that's what the BBNJ agreement provides us, and Alice has already shared sort of the institutions that we are trying to create to enable that, right? So we will have a scientific and technical body that will look to make these decisions on a multitude of things, but including marine protected areas. Now, having the institution, of course, does not, the institution and really great text does not mean it will actually be operationalized, right? And then the question becomes, how will that operationalization look like in practice, and what do we need to grapple with? And a few personal reflections. One is, what will be the starting point in those discussions? Will there be a reopening of whether traditional knowledge is in fact on equal footing with quote-unquote science? That will be the first element we need to figure out, right? What will be the starting point of that discussion? And then the second element is, going to be mindset and almost, I call it scientific culture, or perhaps I should call it knowledge culture. Is there a sentiment amongst the people who are represented in that body about what they are open to acknowledging as legitimate knowledge? Because inevitably, and I've just completed a PhD and currently writing an epilogue about all my problems with academia. But one of the things that we're going to see is there's going to be questions of rigor. There's going to be questions of replicability. There's going to be questions of, do you have empirical evidence to support what you're saying? And the reality of the situation is that indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge isn't even something that is historically or traditionally written down. It's passed on orally, right? So the elements or the characteristics that makes science be perceived as robust will not be had for indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge. So there's really going to be some cultural elements that need to be grappled with. The other issue that I'm really interested in is just the human-to-human interaction of those types of discussions as well, right? Because let's be fair here. Although indigenous peoples have had exposure and opportunities for formalization in the multilateral process, like UNDRIP or the People's Forum and all these types of avenues in the CBD, for example, in the UNFCCC, where they have committees or institutional bodies, the reality of the situation is they're now going to have to go in and defend their knowledge or the legitimacy of their knowledge to people who historically, typically feel that their knowledge is, going to use the word superior because another word isn't coming to mind, but essentially that, right? So there's going to be all these layers that we will have to grapple with to see if the opportunity that BBNJ provides us actually materializes. It's going to be an interesting next few years.
Thank you for that, Angelique. It's clear that equal footing also raises very thorny issues of equity and representation in this regard.
I think let's move a little bit back, actually, to thinking about the economic and financial side of this, because as you pointed out, Angelique, it's whoever funds the research decides the researcher what the priorities are. And you could, if you look at the economy in general, if you look at scientific knowledge, is sometimes turned into innovation, is turned into business, is turned into industry. And I don't really have the feeling that the same goes for, to the same scale at least, when it comes to indigenous and traditional knowledge. So maybe one approach here would be to actually look at sort of the innovation needs of the blue economy. And maybe I can draw on you here, João, to have some thoughts around that.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. So, of course, I think that to begin with, and I'll start with a personal view, is that, as Andrei and other panel members have already mentioned, the ocean is just one. So it's this huge mass of water that moves around and where things move around. But however, the way the ocean has been represented in negotiations, in policy making and in governance is as a fixed territory. And is my personal opinion that that is a cause of inefficiencies in ocean governments and also inequalities. And that is being seen now, especially when we think about the emerging blue economy that is increasingly digital, it is increasingly data-driven, and of course we have to think about what inequalities do these characteristics generate. So countries who don't have access to data and to analytic capacity, they won't be able to participate in value creation, attract investment, or regulate activities by their own volition. So one of the things that I believe is the mission of ocean science diplomacy is to address these inequalities and act where these discrepancies of knowledge are most flagrant. And in fact, when you think about ocean data, and that's a topic that I've been devoting a lot of my time lately, we are on the edge of seismic change in the way that we collect data from the ocean and in the way that we use it. Up to now, data has been collected mostly on a national basis. It has been collected mostly by scientists, by research initiatives. However, as the blue economy expands, we are also seeing private actors coming into the field of ocean data collection. And these private actors, they are moved by the profit motive. So they collect data to monetize it, to make a profit. And so what happens when we have this very large discrepancy between the capacity of some countries to collect data to monetize it against the incapacity of other countries? Especially when now we speak of a global ocean, we also have to speak of a global blue economy. So countries will be collecting data in the territorial waters of other countries or in international waters, but this data will be, let's say, for example, used to build AI models. These AI models will be monetized. They will provide a benefit to those who create them. But yet, the data that is behind this creation is being extracted in parts that will, as of now, I believe, will not see that benefit. And so I think that one of the most important missions of ocean science diplomacy, and I think it has been reflected in the recent treaties like the BBNJ and others, is to exactly to address these inequalities in the capacity to acquire data, to and work with the data, and to get benefits from the data. In the sense, what I'm trying to say is that data, ocean data itself is a new resource, and that resource has to be shared equally.
Thank you, João. And on that note, we'll switch to the nature section, and that mainly then, we are thinking of nature then as a triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, or more specifically, plastic pollution. And I'll ask a pretty open question here to the panel, well, maybe start with you, Alice. What science would you say multilateral diplomacy needs to address the triple nature crisis?
Well, I think maybe to make a connection to my previous speaker, which highlighted a really important issue, namely the data and the data availability, and also maybe the need to expand science diplomacy and think also about data diplomacy. I think we see it clearly in the BBNJ agreement, and I also don't know how they want to address this issue. There is the vision to, the provisions say they will establish a clearinghouse mechanism, and the different, I think, interests of states show that it's not yet clear what data should be in there. And as you say, it will likely not be the massive amount of data produced by private actors that do not share. Many oil companies that have a lot of data that would be extremely important for environmental impact assessments. However, often that data is not curated and managed in a way that it can easily be used in specific contexts. So there is also this issue of interoperability. But in the BBNJ context, I think you have to correct me, but Brazil's vision really was to include all data collected on the high seas and to include it in a clearinghouse mechanism, to make it available to all parties of the treaty, and specifically, to underpin marine protected area designation, monitoring and control and surveillance, but obviously also to facilitate COP decisions on where to establish a protected area, but then also to trace marine genetic resources and avoid an exploitation through biotechnology by actors with the necessary capacity. So I think that the question on what science is needed, it's a really tricky one because it's highly contested also in the BBNJ agreement, and many of the scientific bodies and also the clearinghouse mechanisms that exist do not really serve as role models. So I think there are discussions on maybe looking at the International Seabed Authority and how they oblige contractors to share their data, but that's also not even half of them do upload their data on OBIS and GBIF and all the different platforms that already exist. So it's that data issue, but then also the scientific and technical bodies. The Convention on Biological Diversity has a SABSTA, the scientific and technical body, that should, in theory, provide the COP with science advice. And here it has turned into a mini COP where governments just send diplomats that negotiate a text but do not provide science advice. So I think it's the question what science we need, but when we talk about particular agreement and policies, it's also what's the institutions we set up to ensure that the science actually gets where it has to go.
Yes, and what institutions we set up, that's also like a very technical question then. Edvard and I discussed it a little bit and maybe not go into the details of that, or what do you want to say?
I have a question about really how things fit. And I'm tempted to pose that question to Kieran here, because you have provided us with really, really wonderful detailed material of how the EU as such a large, even its own kind of multilateral system, how it operates to tackle different. So now we have a situation which is defined by standard, the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Pollution, of course, can be anything, right? But to what extent are these existing frameworks ready to take on board science to accelerate the responses to the triple planetary crisis?
Thank you. Well, I hope they are set up to do exactly that. So I mentioned the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Innovation Alliance previously, and that's based on the All-Atlantic Declaration, which was signed in 2022. And in terms of ocean science diplomacy, I think it's a key document. And that declaration of the shared priorities between the EU and the 12 other partners very much touch on all, very much go into the issues of the three planetary crises, goes through them all and says that these are our shared priorities. So we have worked with partners to set up this alliance where we will work together, but then exactly what can come out of that. And one of the two areas we've agreed to really focus on is ocean observation, which goes back to the conversations about data. And obviously ocean observation modeling is key for all marine knowledge, and for science you need knowledge and data, and it's key, and that's so again announced as part of the European Ocean Pact. We announced an ocean observation initiative. So I guess we're trying to use the structures we have to go, okay, let's move this on and let's get science that's really needed. In terms of ocean observation, it has for many years very much relied on international cooperation. The ocean is a very big place, different countries play their part and build data sets and feed it all in together. But now the US is disengaging from that, and the US has traditionally covered the expense of a significant number of the infrastructure that's needed to do ocean observation. So, for example, the Argo floats that are in the sea, the US cover a huge proportion of those, and they will soon stop working, the data sets will become incomplete, historic data sets may become unavailable. So what the European Commission has announced is this Ocean Observation Initiative. We're putting a lot of money into it. DG Research and Innovation, my colleagues there, with our colleagues in DG Maritime and Fisheries, are currently working on it. And as part of it, which is interesting, and for people who are studying ocean science diplomacy, I think this will be one to watch. When President Ursula von der Leyen announced this Ocean Observation Initiative, she specifically said, we're calling on international partners to join us. So it's not just an EU initiative, it's going to be an international initiative. My colleagues are right now in the process of working what exactly that will mean. So I think it is going to be a very interesting test case of how can international ocean science diplomacy work in what is quite a crucial area.
Thank you for that.
Yes, I think that when you look at the EU, it has many policy-oriented strategies in the ocean, like we just most recently the European Ocean Pact, but like it's been many over the years here. What would be interesting for you, sort of coming like maybe Andrei, Angelique, looking at it very much from the outside of the EU, how do you think these works, and how could the EU turn these into something that really provides that type of science diplomacy that we need for the ocean?
So let me start, because I'm kind of intrigued by this afternoon sessions on the potential risk of closing down the Open to the World initiative that it was in the EU. We understand that geopolitical tensions are really at the mindset of the population, but this Open to the World initiative was mainly was able to provide a lot of access to infrastructure, and not just in the ocean, but particularly in the ocean. So the European Union has today one of the biggest providers of models for the ocean, that we can understand what this water mass is behaving and how it's impacting climate and climate back. And that was particularly important for us in Brazil when we had a major oil spill in 2019, because then Mercator, and with the data from Copernicus, were able to send us a model for where the oil spill was actually drifting to and from, and that was determined for our emergency actions right there at the spot. So I think that parts of the Ocean Science Diplomacy Initiative within the European framework will actually have to look at this from a completely different perspective than the discourses and narratives that I just heard in the other room today. Because this is something that is on everybody. And on top of that, as Kieran has said, we lost the support and provision of infrastructure from the US, and that's terribly serious for the ocean, because yes, they were and they're still responsible for more than 60% of the equipment that we have in the water today. And if they shut it out, and we're going to be having a problem on understanding something that we don't understand at all. So I think that the EU now has the possibility and also a big part of fulfilling this gap, but together with international partners in a very open way, I would say. Angelique, would you?
Yeah, I agree with what Andrei has said, and I think there's the sort of the work that Kieran is doing and his colleagues around what in calling to the world to join the European Union, what does genuine partnership look like, right? And what does that entail? How do we ensure that there isn't repetition of perhaps questionable past practices, where we're ensuring that this isn't in another moment of extraction from international other countries. I think there's also a question of who gets to design what knowledge is, what work is done, what knowledge is generated, and so on. And I think the other piece of the puzzle is also going to be what is going to be the legacy of this initiative, right? Will infrastructure, will technology be left in those countries? Or will this be one of those opportunities that we all get very excited about, and it sounds very exciting. We all get very excited about, but the result or the legacy of it is potentially brain drain, right? Potentially, we all want to work in the labs that we see in Germany, right? Because why get trained in a lab in Germany, then I don't have a lab when I get home? I'm a lawyer, I have no idea what labs they do in labs. But also, is this going to be long-term and embedded? Is this going to make sure that when we build capacity, when we work together, it's going to be on equal footing, it's going to be a genuine partnership? So those are the things that, Kieran, always happy to chat about how the European Union goes about doing these things. But those are going to be the markers of success. And I think when we're all working in our board meetings on KPIs, key performance indicators, one of the markers of success is going to be that genuine partnership and that legacy piece. And sorry to divert us a little bit, but I was in one of the sessions this morning about how such initiatives could be subsequently leveraged as soft power by the European Union, which I thought was another fascinating perspective of how leveraging these scientific collaborations to then become soft power in the diplomatic world. And so the motivations out there are many, and I think being honest and genuine about and open about what it could ultimately lead into, and having difficult discussion from the inception is going to be important, and something we certainly should not shy away from. Thank you.
Maybe Kieran, would you like to comment on that quickly?
Yeah, no, very fair challenge. Certainly we're setting out, and everything I've read says all the right things. But yes, at the moment, so the European Commission does, its priorities have to reflect the time we're in, and at the moment, if not just in ocean science, but across the board, competitiveness comes up all the time, and now also in terms of security and in the research world, dual use, so civilian and defense or military use. So yes, while my pitch for the ocean observation is very much data sharing, all the good stuff, I'm cognizant of a lot of other people in the Commission say we need to focus our resources on European competitiveness and military. So, fair challenge, I guess. I hope you're wrong, that it all works out. But fair question.
Yeah, seeing that you mentioned the word security in here, we could skip over to the third main topic and touch on that before we open up more of a general discussion among the panel and then include you in the audience. I'll ask you, João, because now we have all this talk of dual use, military repurposing of science has become something that's endemic in Europe, at least, maybe in the rest of the world as well. What happens to the independence of researchers in such geopolitically challenging times, and what does this mean for science diplomacy for the ocean? I mean, I know it's a wide question, but let's start with you, João, and then others can jump in and comment.
I think that's a very, very timely and important question. I think we are all aware that the security situation has changed drastically in the last 5 years or less, and it's plainly obvious that the work of scientists is being restricted throughout Europe and probably throughout the Western world. I just noted down some. So research partnerships are being increasingly scrutinized. Dual-use concerns are growing. And I think this is a very important aspect, and I'm going back to the data thing, is that the trust in data sources now matters more than ever. And so I think this is another aspect that I would like to highlight about ocean data, is that, yes, we need to share data. Data allows cooperation. It's essential for ocean sustainability, but also in this increasingly difficult security environment, data is becoming a strategic asset with implications for security and sovereignty. And so this brings a whole new set of considerations when you think about data sharing, and obviously that spills over to scientific collaborations, unfortunately. So, but I think that the solution, the base of whatever solution we can find to this problem is trust. Trust in data sources, trust between scientists, trust between institutions. And I think that ocean science diplomacy must also work to enable that trust that is necessary to deal with the new security situation.
A good friend of mine in Solomon Islands in the Pacific is a Vice Chancellor of the Solomon Islands National University, Dr. Transform Angorao. And he is a master of the one-liner, and I remember him saying not long ago, knowledge is sovereignty. And I just want you to think about that, and relate it perhaps to something else, which is also a fact of our times, namely how increased private ownership of data will impact on security and sovereignty. Any takers for that? Alice, I'm sure you... Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm more focusing on the environmental aspect, and I actually think we have not talked enough about the environmental concerns that we have in the ocean acidification, pollution, the effects of climate change on the ocean, marine biodiversity loss, and so on and so on. I think the digital twin of the ocean that the European Commission is building, and also the EU mission and also the EU Pact, the first point that's always mentioned is resilience of marine ecosystems, the need to conserve marine ecosystems, and I mean, of course we need to talk about security issues, but I'm a bit worried that we forget the environmental security that is also at stake.
Maybe an additional question which I have to pose to Angelique here about sovereignty and security and what not. What should be commonly known, but which in some quarters isn't so very well known, is that among the 39 states that you represent in the Association of Small Island States, a number of those are pretty strongly threatened by a particular effect of global climate change, namely sea level rise. Is that a clear-cut case of a certain amount of knowledge about the rate of sea level rise that you can equate to predictions for the future, or to me it seems a really fundamental question?
No, absolutely, and I mean, so sea level rise threatens not as many all small island developing states as well as many coastal countries altogether. And it's going to be critical for us to have the data, just knowing where things are, but also the projections to understand where things are going, and in order for us to be able to build resilience. I, for one, will not be the one to start, for the starting point to be for us to leave our homes. Absolutely not. The first thing we will need to do is to see how to build resilience. And I'm from a country that, you know, whether we like it or not, has had to turn to land reclamation in response to limited land mass in order to house our people, as well as have space for renewable energy, all in the plight of, you know, making sure that we are resilient. And it's interesting, right, in that at the year in which we started planning for land reclamation, the predictions were whatever, X. But now we see that things are accelerating. So all of a sudden, we've actually put many people, many of our local population in harm's way because we didn't have the projections that we needed in order to be resilient. So it's really, and unfortunately, with climate change, sadly, we're, you know, it's a moving target, if you like, in the sense that we're always trying to keep up with how bad how bad the impacts are on many places, but in particular on small island developing states. So it's definitely something we need in terms of data. It will threaten issues of sovereignty, for sure. And as AOSIS, one of the things that we've maintained as a position is that whatever happens in terms of changes to our land, we will not lose statehood. So I will forever be from the Seychelles.
Thank you for that, Angelique. There is a situation there which, in a sense, involves long historical lines. The loss of land through sea level rise and the projected loss of sovereignty, possibly, is something that hasn't been recorded in documented history. Of course, things have happened in previous times, but there is a particularly urgent situation that we are dealing with now, and thank you for pointing that out.
Follow up on what you were talking about, Elise, and actually connect a little bit some of the various projects that you are involved in, and to look a little bit at the dots there that I'd like to connect a little bit, because when you look at digital ocean twins and technology sharing, we've sort of barely touched upon it, but we have mentioned it, and at the same time, how can that be used, in your view, for biodiversity loss policies and for nature conservation?
Yeah, so what it was mentioned, the monitoring or the observation initiative by the European Commission. And so there is the idea to create this European Union digital twin of the ocean, so like a virtual replica of the ocean. The objective is to include data like the biological aspects, the physical, the chemical ones, also the socio-ecological ones, and to create, how can we, forecasting, modeling, using AI to make sense of data, but also to respond to the data gaps. So I think one aspect related to the ocean is that many parts are still unknown. I mean, IOC UNESCO publishes regular reports showing how many data gaps actually exist in many parts of the world. And so the idea of the digital twin of the ocean to integrate existing data, to facilitate modeling, forecasting, or I think it was mentioned by Enrico Letta about the anticipation, right? I think that's also inherent to this tool, but also to solve trade-offs. So where should I build my wind park? Or is it better to use that area for a protected area? Or so to solve trade-offs, to anticipate, to forecast, that's the vision, I think, of the European digital twin of the ocean. And in our research, we try to see under which conditions those tools could be used in multilateral decision-making. Right? I mean, we talked about trust. Under what conditions could such a digital twin of the ocean be used to facilitate negotiations, particularly, for instance, regarding where should we designate protected areas in the ocean? So to have a tool delivering data to facilitate the discussion between decision makers. And there is the Convention on Biological Diversity. They have engaged in an exercise, the so-called ecologically and biologically significant marine areas, and you had representatives of different regions meeting during a week working with data, so it was very messy. And I think here a digital twin of the ocean could at least help to provide systematic data, visualizations, and maps. But again, in a multilateral decision-making context, it would mean new ways to think how to include technology in that context to have everybody on board. So will China trust the EU digital twin in the scientific and technical body? Should there be it's a difficult question, because developing such a tool, and I think you know it better than me, is a very costly action involving many different research teams, infrastructures, Mercator Ocean International. So it's a big endeavor to copy that for an international purpose. I think it's extremely difficult, but then how could you use that tool to facilitate decisions? I think it's a fascinating question, but right now we have to fix many issues in multilateralism itself, right? And maybe then comes the question on the technological side.
Maybe then you can hand the microphone to the man next to you, Andrei, because it would be interesting from your point of view, from the Brazilian point of view here, looking at the European digital twins of the ocean. What do you see as the major obstacles there and also opportunities?
So we are getting close to competing with a reception.
Oh.
I'd like to remind everyone about that, which means short and sweet,
Very
please.
short. But there's something very intriguing, because Alice was really, really right in call attention for the environment. And the Atlantic is a super important basin, because it shifts the cold water from Antarctica that then at the equator turns and brings summer for the global north, or for the north hemisphere. And that water movement is slowing down. And because of that, we might experience something that was captured in a movie, The Day After Tomorrow. So you should all take a look at that, because that would mean like high migrations to Mexico and to Africa because of the unbearable cold that will be here. So it's kind of very worrying. So a digital twin of the ocean would actually be able to tell us at which pace that is happening. But the digital twin won't solve everything. We still need the equipments in the water to validate the models that are being produced by the digital twin. So now us at INPO, at my institute in Brazil, we are trying to figure out how to develop a digital twin of the South Atlantic, because as Alice has pointed out, there are two major basins in the world which are least understood. One is the South Atlantic, the other one is the South Pacific. So both of these basins are terribly non-ensampled. So we should do an effort to understand how those things are happening, so we can actually secure and sea level rise and ocean acidification and pollution from stopping.
Thank you, Andrei. Well, we started 20 minutes late, not because of us, but because of other happenings. So we sort of actually reached the end of the program time. However, I did promise that we would take a couple of questions, and then we wrap up with Edvard. So if there's anyone here, I don't have any questions coming up on Slido, but okay. I thought the questions already, I thought somebody maybe would have put something on online. Then we'll very quickly just do the questions from the floor. Please be very brief and just ask a question and maybe direct it to someone if you have a question. Anyone? Okay. Well, yeah, okay. Gary, please. And then just a very brief question, please.
Thanks. Really great discussions. Fantastic. Super quick. Really great discussions. Really inspiring. A lot more questions after the session than before, but we talked a lot about the science. As a scientist myself, I'm really curious about the diplomacy. So maybe moving away from the B&J, do you have any tips or recommendations into other multilateral agreements, the Global Plastics Treaty or the deep sea mining? What are the kind of best practices or things that we can apply? I know that benefit sharing is a nice thing I wasn't familiar with, but what kind of practices in the diplomacy can we utilize going forward into others? BB&J is a good example, but others are more at risk, I think. Thank you.
Okay, any one of you? We have one microphone here that we can use. Okay, then Andrei, quick example.
I have the best example.
We have quick time for the two ladies there as well.
I'll give very quickly. It's the ozone layer. we were able to do something about that. So we are capable of doing something.
Thank you. And then you, would you please just state who you are? I forgot to say that about Gary Cat from CIMAR there. And you are?
I'm Daniela Palmberg from UNESCO. And I just wanted to quickly follow up on some of the points that Angelique made really articulately about indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge and the role that it plays. I'd be curious to hear about the other side, the European speakers. Do you feel like there is a readiness to receive that on an equal basis and to genuinely internalize that there's an alternative way of knowing that is necessary for taking on these challenges related to the ocean and maybe more broadly, especially given this narrative of stewardship that is already quite mainstreamed, and yeah, the depth and readiness of accepting that. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a nice question. Any of our Europeans here who wants to say something? Maybe Kieran.
I can quickly and then. So I think the IPBES, so the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, I think they have really shown that they at least think creatively and innovatively about this. So the transformative change assessment draws a lot on knowledge and concepts from indigenous people and local communities. And I think its success maybe also influenced discussions in BBNJ because there was something to draw on. I also think that the concepts of the rights of nature and so on, those are things that we discuss in Europe, I would say. At least we should. In the academic circles we do. I don't know if in the commission you have...
Oh yeah, that was you. Yeah, you afterwards. Yeah, very. No, wait, just quickly, Kieran. Yeah.
So certainly, we very much say that we are prepared and want to take on board that knowledge. One example is we're currently reviewing the EU's Arctic strategy. And again, the Arctic doesn't only relate to the ocean, and in that very much we keep the drafts I've seen. We very much emphasise indigenous knowledge. So. We certainly say that in all the official documents, and I really hope it is the case that across the board we're ready to take it on.
So call to action for you, Kieran, is to take this on board and take it with you to the EU Commission when we get back. Okay, thank you. Just quickly state who you are and then a question.
Maria Arkin from the ISC and UKCH. My question is to Andrei. Thank you so much for that wonderful overview you did on ocean governance at the beginning of your first intervention for us non-experts. And my question is, at what point, if you know, at what point in an oceanographer career do they get exposed to ocean politics, ocean governance, and how do you, is this at the uni level, the education level, or at a later stage in their career, and how do they navigate both worlds, the scientific and the diplomatic fields? Thank you very much.
I have a very short answer to that. They are forged by the fires of hell. They are not exposed to anything or trained, but it really depends on where you're going to school and where you're born in, because in global south countries, usually scientists are much closer to the decision-making process because they are needed, and many times even them become negotiators at a round table, right? Because there isn't enough diplomats in the room, whereas usually countries in the global north, they do a synthesis report and they never participate in the process, or they don't even join the delegation. When they do, they become like in the back, and usually they don't interact with the diplomats, so they don't quite understand. So it's a tricky question, but the answer is that they are all forged by the fires of hell.
Thank you, Andrei. We've now used 80 minutes actually since we started.
Yeah.
So, but we'll then wrap up, please, Edvard.
And we started a bit late, so we can afford to steal a few minutes of the reception, can't we? It is about time to round it off here, and I just want to thank the panelists in advance for having kept such a wonderful fire going. From all your different perspectives of expertise. I have a final question, which I have to confess is kind of adapted from the UN Decade for Ocean Science. It's kind of a slogan, and it's the kind of question that will demand each and every one of you to just use no more than 2 or 3 sentences. It's about what would be the ocean the ocean science diplomacy we need for the ocean that we want. we run like that. Yeah.
Quick round.
I'd say just one based on trust that sticks to the science. I think I've seen in the limited experience I have in this area, when we start drifting out of the science and into policy, things get murky, so stick to the science.
I'll add a few words then. Trust, integrity, but let's not forget equity. I think it's unhelpful for us to have this dichotomy between science versus equity. I think we need to find a way of bridging that and showing how science also takes into consideration or works together, is seen together with equity.
I think that ocean science diplomacy must address, first and foremost, inequality knowledge, asymmetries, inequalities in data access. I think those are the two main concerns of ocean science diplomacy, because those are, to be honest, let me just go back to a point. It depends also on how we see the ocean. I think that there is now this trend to look at the ocean as a source of resources, of wealth, of economic growth, of well-being, and we need knowledge and data to fulfill that. So I think that in that context, I think that the ocean science diplomacy must address knowledge asymmetries first and foremost.
I would say that we need to part away from the notion of ocean science diplomacy as a soft power and start thinking about it as a collective effort for the greater good of all of us.
And I also think we should draw on the existing multilateral institutions we have established, but maybe think about how to critically innovate them. So not abolish them, but make them stronger to also be adaptive to the visions of ocean science diplomacy.
Thank you. The ocean, so science diplomacy we need for the ocean we want. And now I give the word to my co-moderator.
Well, Will, thank you so much for this excellent panel. We could have been going on for hours, and it's a shame we started late, but we will release you now quickly into the reception that you're all waiting for. I just wanted to bring to your attention this policy brief that several of us here were involved in creating after an event that we had in Brussels in February 2024. I have a few copies for those who want to approach me, but there's also the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. They have a booth down on the ground floor where they're also on the table there. So you get a little bit of background. It's actually, you can say in many ways, what we've been discussing here builds a little bit upon what we did here. So you get a little bit of historical background as well, and a few provocations inside, I dare say, which we all need occasionally. Thank you so much for your attention and for being here. Thank you.